Picture this. Beneath the golden African sun, where acacia trees stretch their ancient arms toward endless blue skies, lies perhaps the most profound secret in human history. What if everything you believed about humanity's first home was not just incomplete, but geographically misplaced by thousands of miles? What if the Garden of Eden, that primordial paradise described in sacred texts across three major world religions, was not nestled somewhere in modern-day Iraq or Turkey, but flourishing in the very heart of Africa itself? For centuries, scholars, theologians, and explorers have searched for Eden's location, following rivers through Mesopotamia, climbing mountains in Armenia, and mapping ancient territories across the Middle East. Yet increasingly, evidence points toward a startling possibility that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about where human civilization began. Could it be that both our spiritual and biological origins trace back to the same magnificent continent that gave birth to humanity itself? The story begins where all human stories begin, with our ancestors. Deep within the Rift Valley of East Africa, where volcanic peaks pierce the horizon and ancient lake beds hold secrets spanning millions of years, scientists have uncovered evidence that revolutionizes our understanding of human origins. Here, in places like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania and the fossil-rich deposits of Ethiopia, researchers discovered remains that tell an extraordinary tale of human emergence. In 1974, when paleoanthropologist Donald Johanson unearthed the skeleton of Lucy in Ethiopia's Afar region, he uncovered more than ancient bones. He revealed a connection to our deepest past that resonates with remarkable precision to biblical accounts of human creation. Lucy, dating back 3.2 million years, represents one of our earliest known ancestors, discovered in the very region that multiple ancient traditions identify as humanity's birthplace. But the connections run far deeper than fossil evidence alone. When geneticists mapped human DNA in the late 20th century, they made a discovery that sent shockwaves through both scientific and religious communities. The research pointed to what scientists termed Mitochondrial Eve, the common ancestor of all modern humans who lived in Africa between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago. This genetic mother of humanity emerged from the same African landscape that ancient texts describe as the location of paradise itself. The biblical account in Genesis speaks of a garden planted eastward in Eden, watered by a river that divided into four branches: the Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates. For generations, scholars focused on the latter two rivers, clearly identified with Mesopotamian waterways, leading to the conventional placement of Eden in modern-day Iraq. However, ancient texts offer intriguing alternative interpretations that point toward African locations for these mysterious waters. The Gihon, Genesis tells us, winds through the entire land of Cush. Cush, in ancient Hebrew texts, consistently refers to regions of Africa, particularly Ethiopia and Sudan. Medieval Islamic geographer Al-Masudi, writing in the 10th century, explicitly identified the Gihon with the Nile River, suggesting that Eden's waters flowed through African territories. This identification gains remarkable support when we consider that the Blue Nile originates from Lake Tana in Ethiopian Highlands, a region that Ethiopian Orthodox traditions have long claimed as Eden's true location. The Pishon River presents another fascinating connection to African geography. Genesis describes it as flowing around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. Ancient Nubian and Ethiopian evidence revealed that ancient Nubian and Ethiopia were indeed renowned throughout the ancient world for their gold reserves. The region's wealth in precious metals was so legendary that it supplied gold to Egyptian pharaohs and later to King Solomon himself, creating trade networks that connected African territories to the broader ancient world. Ethiopian religious traditions provide some of the most compelling evidence for Eden's African location. The Kebra Nagast, or Glory of Kings, an ancient Ethiopian text dating to at least the 13th century but containing much older oral traditions, claims that Ethiopia is the location of the original paradise. This text doesn't merely assert Ethiopian connections to biblical history. It provides detailed geographical descriptions that align remarkably well with the region's actual topography. Mount Zukwila, southeast of Addis Ababa, holds particular significance in Ethiopian Orthodox tradition as a potential Eden location. This extinct volcano, surrounded by crater lakes and lush vegetation, matches biblical descriptions of a well-watered garden in elevated terrain. The mountain's unique ecosystem, isolated and protected by its elevation, has preserved plant and animal species found nowhere else in the region, creating what many describe as a natural paradise. Early church fathers also considered African locations for Eden. Ephrem the Syrian, writing in the 4th century, suggested that Eden might lie in regions far from Mesopotamia, while other early theologians debated whether the garden might be found in Ethiopia or other African territories. These weren't merely speculative discussions. They reflected serious scholarly engagement with geographical and textual evidence available to ancient scholars. The linguistic evidence proves equally fascinating. The Hebrew word Eden itself means delight or pleasure, but ancient African languages contained remarkably similar terms with identical meanings. Ge'ez, the liturgical language of Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity and one of the world's oldest written languages, contains numerous parallels to Hebrew terminology used in Genesis creation accounts. These linguistic connections suggest either common origins or extensive ancient contact between Hebrew and African traditions. Archaeological discoveries continued to support African connections to humanity's earliest chapters. The Turkana boy, discovered by Richard Leakey's team in Kenya in 1984, represents one of the most complete early human skeletons ever found. Dating to approximately 1.6 million years ago, this discovery, along with countless others throughout East Africa, establishes the region as humanity's evolutionary cradle with unprecedented clarity. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes from ancient Egyptian creation mythology, which shares remarkable parallels with biblical Eden accounts. Egyptian texts describe a primordial mound emerging from primeval waters, surrounded by perfect vegetation and inhabited by the first humans. This mound, called the Island of Creation, was said to be located in the Nile's source regions, precisely where Ethiopian traditions place the Garden of Eden. The Nile itself has long been considered sacred in African traditions, viewed as a life-giving force that transforms desert into fertile paradise. Ancient Egyptian religious texts describe the Nile source as a place of eternal spring, where the river emerged from underground caverns in mountains far to the south. Modern geography confirms that the Blue Nile does indeed originate from springs in Ethiopian highlands, emerging from Lake Tana through landscapes that remain remarkably Edenic in their natural beauty. During the colonial period, European explorers explicitly searched for Eden in African territories. General Charles Gordon, the British military leader who later died at Khartoum, became convinced that Eden was located in the region where the Blue and White Niles converge in modern-day Sudan. His extensive geographical research, combined with his deep biblical scholarship, led him to publish detailed theories about Eden's African location, theories that influenced Victorian-era biblical interpretation. Portuguese explorers in the 15th and 16th centuries, encountering the Ethiopian highlands for the first time, wrote extensively about landscapes that seemed to match biblical descriptions of paradise. They described regions of eternal spring, abundant water sources, fertile soils, and diverse wildlife that created natural gardens of extraordinary beauty. These accounts, preserved in colonial archives, provide eyewitness testimony to the Edenic qualities of Ethiopian terrain. Modern geological evidence adds another compelling layer to the African Eden theory. The East African Rift System, where humanity's earliest fossils have been discovered, represents one of Earth's most geologically active regions. Volcanic activity has created fertile soils, while tectonic forces have generated numerous springs and lakes that would have provided abundant fresh water for early human populations. The region's unique combination of geological features creates microclimates that support exceptional biodiversity, precisely the conditions we might expect in a primordial garden. Contemporary biblical scholar David Rohl has proposed detailed theories placing Eden in the Armenian Highlands, but his research also acknowledges compelling African alternatives. Rohl's geographical analysis of biblical river systems reveals that ancient watercourses were far more complex than modern maps suggest, with possible connections between African and Middle Eastern river systems through ancient geological channels that no longer exist. Ethiopian scholar Ephrem Isaac has provided perhaps the most comprehensive academic argument for Eden's African location. Isaac, fluent in multiple ancient languages, including Ge'ez, Hebrew, and Aramaic, has traced linguistic and cultural connections between Ethiopian traditions and biblical accounts that suggest not just contact, but common origins. His research reveals that Ethiopian religious traditions contain creation stories and geographical references that predate known Christian influence, suggesting independent preservation of ancient Near Eastern traditions. The question of Eden's location also intersects with broader questions about human migration patterns and cultural transmission. If Africa was indeed humanity's birthplace, both biologically and spiritually, then the spread of Eden traditions across different cultures might represent preserved memories of humanity's original homeland, carried by migrating populations as they spread across the globe. Recent archaeological discoveries continue to challenge conventional assumptions about ancient African civilizations. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dating to approximately 11,500 years ago, have revealed sophisticated religious architecture that predates known agricultural development. Similar discoveries across Africa suggested complex spiritual and cultural development occurred throughout the continent far earlier than previously recognized, providing the historical context in which Eden traditions might have emerged. The intersection of faith and archaeology in Eden research raises profound questions about how we understand religious texts in light of archaeological evidence. Rather than contradicting religious beliefs, African Eden theories often align remarkably well with scriptural descriptions, suggesting that ancient texts might preserve more geographical accuracy than conventional interpretations have recognized. Climate research reveals that the Sahara Desert was once a green, well-watered landscape supporting diverse ecosystems and human populations. Ancient lake beds preserved under desert sands show that North and East Africa experienced radically different environmental conditions during the periods when human civilization emerged. These green Sahara periods might have provided the ecological context for the paradise described in ancient texts. As we stand at the intersection of faith, archaeology, and genetics, the evidence increasingly points toward Africa as humanity's spiritual as well as biological homeland. The continent that gave birth to Lucy, to Mitochondrial Eve, to the earliest human civilizations, may also have been the location of that primordial garden where, according to sacred tradition, humanity first walked with the divine. This possibility transforms our understanding of both religious history and human identity. If Eden was indeed in Africa, then the story of Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained takes on new dimensions, connecting every person on Earth to African soil in ways that transcend cultural, religious, and geographical boundaries. It suggests that our deepest spiritual longings and our most profound sense of home might both point toward the same magnificent continent where our human story first emerged under ancient skies. The mystery of Eden's location remains unsolved, perhaps intentionally so, inviting each generation to rediscover the connections between faith and human experience. Yet the evidence increasingly suggests that when we search for humanity's beginnings, whether spiritual or biological, all roads lead back to Africa. What does it mean if our species' garden was African soil, our first rivers African waters, our original home African highlands?
Perhaps it means that paradise was never truly lost, but simply forgotten, waiting to be rediscovered by those willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads, back to the continent where our human story began. The search for Eden continues, and with each archaeological discovery, each genetic breakthrough, each preserved tradition uncovered, we move closer to understanding not just where we came from, but who we truly are. The Garden of Eden may indeed have bloomed under African skies, tended by our earliest ancestors in landscapes that remain paradisiacal to this day. If this exploration of Eden's possible African origins has sparked your curiosity about the deep connections between faith, archaeology, and human history, subscribe to Origins of Faith for more investigations into humanity's most enduring mysteries. Like this video if it's changed how you think about biblical geography, and share your thoughts in the comments about where you believe humanity's first garden might have flourished. Next week, we'll explore another fascinating intersection of scripture and archaeology, as we investigate whether Noah's Ark has actually been discovered in the mountains of Turkey, and what that might mean for our understanding of ancient history. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep wondering about the remarkable stories that connect us all to our shared human past.